bustling industrial town and home to some 1,800 factories. But some 25 years ago, few could envisage that this manufacturing heart of Singapore would emerge from a wasteland of swamp and forest. It was on this windswept, empty tract of land that the first factory was built. The National Iron and Steel Mill began operation on the 2nd of August, 1963. Financed solely by local entrepreneurs, the mill was the first of its kind to be established. Opened by Dr. Goh Keng Swee, the mill was seen as an important catalyst for industrialization. It was to supply the steel products to the expanding construction industry. At the same time, it could provide employment to some 400 workers. The opening of the National Iron and Steel Mill not only marked the birth of an industrial town, but also Singapore's first bold step on the road to industrialization. In the late 50s, Singapore was burdened with a load of economic problems. Jobs were scarce. It was estimated that over 35,000 people were without jobs. Unemployment in 1959 stood at an alarming rate of 13%, and this was made worse by a rapidly growing population. At the same time, some 20,000 school leavers were entering the job market. The traditional entrepot trade and commerce could no longer generate enough jobs that were needed urgently. Industrialization was the only solution. In 1960, the United Nations survey team involved in the planning of the industrialization program recommended that an industrial town at Jurong be built. Located at the southwestern corner of the island, Jurong had a large area of relatively undeveloped land. The town could be built from scratch, unhampered by resettlement problems. Besides, Jurong also had a deep water frontage, ideal for the development of a port. It was a massive operation involving some 9,000 acres of swamp and undulating land. Work began. The forest was cleared, hills leveled, and swamps filled. By 1964, Jurong's transformation was visible as the first few factories began to appear. What attracted industrialists to Jurong?
Some industries, of course, would go there because of the special features that were required by their type of work. Whereas the shipyards need sea frontage, or in the case of National Iron and Steel Mill, they needed a very large site. This was not very easy to get elsewhere in Singapore. But to add to these natural advantages, of course, I think in the planning of Jurong, we put in, I think, special features, the main objective of which was to create conditions in Jurong that were not inferior to elsewhere in Singapore, and if possible, better. So we build standard factory buildings that people could move into quickly. So water, electricity supplies were ensured, so that you would make it very easy for people to start something there that was suitable. On top of that, of course, there's another very attractive feature, I think, for many businessmen, in that land prices and rentals in Jurong were cheaper than elsewhere in Singapore.
At the same time, other incentives were given. Pioneer status, which meant income tax exemption of up to 5 years, were awarded to selected firms. The main economic thrust in the early 60s was labor-intensive, low-skilled manufacturing industries which could absorb the large pool of unemployed workers. Industries such as food and beverages, textiles and garment were considered as key industries for economic development. Swan Sock Factory, a joint venture between local and Japanese entrepreneurs, was one of the many firms in Jurong which provided jobs for the people.
我们在这个乡村地方，农业也不见得很好啦，在当时的情形啦，那么刚好这边这个工业区开始，那么在偶然的一个机会，我就来这边工作了。
Though jobs were available, people were initially reluctant to work in Jurong. To them, Jurong was too far and isolated. Persuading people to work in Jurong was one of the many problems faced by the pioneer industrialists.
Macam dulu memang susah nak naik bas pun dalam setengah jam, 1 jam baru ada. Di sini jalan pun tak bagus dulu. Jalan tanah merah. Jadi semuanya kampung. Macam saya nak pergi kerja pun goi bersikal datang. Jadi dalam 10 minit ke 15 minit baru sampai dekat bateri ni.
Most workers have to be recruited from all parts of Singapore, mainly from the city. We have to transport them by hire lorry from the city to the factory and return.
To encourage workers to live in Jurong, flats were built. Various social amenities such as shops, clinics, markets, and even schools and banks were provided. Jurong was conceived not only as an industrial estate, but as a self-contained new town. In the mid-60s, separation from Malaysia and the Indonesian confrontation threatened our economic survival. We had to accelerate the industrialization program to provide jobs for an independent nation. But industrialization was not without its uncertainties.
The fundamental problem was that Singapore itself lacked an industrial tradition. We had no tradition of manufacturing. So that our own industrialists, our own businessmen were not quite confident that we could do it. And certainly the foreign investors too had doubts whether Singaporeans could become manufacturers. To overcome that, of course, we had to mount a very heavy training program.
Various joint government training institutes were set up in Jurong. The aim was to train workers to have the essential skills required by the industries. Foreign firms were attracted to set up their own operations. One example is the American oil company Mobil, which chose to build its refinery in mainland Jurong.
Mainly, we were looking for a place to build a refinery in Southeast Asia to supply our requirements throughout the region. At that particular time, the Singapore government was trying to develop the economy in Singapore, and the plan to build an industrial estate in Jurong attracted our attention. The regional location of Singapore as a whole was very attractive to us for logistics reasons, and the location in Jurong itself has proven to be very attractive because it's a better place to operate a refinery than on some of the offshore islands.
Jurong has come a long way since a time when critics termed it as Go's folly. Today, Jurong remains the largest industrial estate. In 25 years, from one isolated factory, it now has about 1,800 factories, employing some 90,000 workers. Jurong embodies an economic vision fulfilled. It created jobs for the nation, put Singapore on the path towards industrialization, and contributed to the development of our economy. Today, the economy is diversified, and the emphasis is on high technology and value-added industries. But the challenges remain the same: the need for Singapore industries to retain their competitive edge and to provide an attractive environment for investors.